to a whole new level. Leader Fan Radio Network.
It's frustrating.
And KFAN.com. 1 minute, 56 seconds past 3 Central Standard Time. We welcome you back to a midweek edition of the Bumper to Bumper program. It's going to be a very fast-moving show today. Thank God we have 3.5 hours. We're going the distance tonight, right? 6:30? Brett Blakemore is back in that chair again. Guardsy, I think, will be back on the show tomorrow. My name is Dan Barreiro, former Ink Stain Wretch newspaper of the Twin Cities. We are delighted that you are here for, I think, should be a very fast-moving, controversial program, almost from start to finish. The Bradshaw and Bryan KFAN text line has been rebooted for your purposes. You can reach us at 64686 unless, sadly, you have been previously muted or blocked. What's better to do on X? Mute or block, or a combination of both? I think different people have different philosophies on that. Many have left. They've gone to Bluesky. Now, some people who went to Bluesky said they would never come back to X. They're frauds. They're back because nothing was happening on Bluesky. So, in any case, but to each their own. Everybody gets to make their own choices on what form of social media they are sadly addicted to. Because we're so fast-moving and we have a guest, our first guest at 3:15, let me get right to it. And I don't know that we're going to need to spend a lot of time on it. A number of people have brought this to my attention. They seem to know me. They seem to have a good understanding of what might motivate me, what might inspire me. Now, I had also heard via other sources, I guess, about this particular elevated form of weather terror that I must tell you, that's where, if we've learned anything about the weather terrorists, it's that we can never count them out. We can never underestimate their ability to create categories that we didn't know really existed. And in this case, it's apparently the likelihood that at least 3 upper Midwestern states, including Iowa, South Dakota, and Minnesota, all are in the danger zone when it comes to exploding trees. The exploding tree phenomenon, which I'm told in parts of Michigan can be true to an extent, is about to hit Minnesota as temperatures plummet to, what are we supposed to get down to, minus 18 at night? Is it tomorrow night or the next night? I think it's like minus 15, minus 18. I don't know. But very severe cold, even by our standards. And here's my first question. If you happen to be near a tree that is showing signs of exploding, do you have time to get away from it? Will there be any noises that will be clues to the fact that, there's another tree about to explode? Is there any way to properly prepare us for this latest devastation, weather terror devastation that has gotten a lot of attention in the Twin Cities over the last, I think, 8 maybe to 12 hours? I saw a quote from your guy, Sven, former KARE 11 weather guy, that if exploding trees were routine, Canada wouldn't exist. I thought it was a pretty good observation. So he, as a weather guy, seemed to be discouraging the notion that among all the other things we have to worry about, dangerous wind chills, right? Pipes that freeze, more ice, like falling over in the ice and not being heard from for like a week. We have now something new that I can honestly say that until the last 12 hours, I'd never heard of exploding trees. Had you?
Not once. Like just combusting
Or
That's
is it
a good
just
question.
collapsing?
I don't know. That's what it does. Does it explode out? In other words, could a piece of the tree end up embedded in your forehead if you're too close to it, or is it just going to collapse?
Is there shrapnel?
I'm not sure what the answer to that is. There shrapnel involved? Right? Yeah, exactly. It's too good. People who get mad at me for talking about weather terror over the better part of the last 30 years. They say, "Oh, you're making this stuff up." Well, why do you make such a big deal about this stuff? I'm not making it up. I'm minding my own business, just doing the job. And out of nowhere, it's get ready. Do what you can to protect yourself from and get away from an exploding tree in your neighborhood. Now, if there's a bunch of exploding trees in Minnesota, I'll have to eat my words. I'll apologize on 100,000 watt radio. I guess I will have to. But I think of all the possible hazards involved with this sort of dangerous cold, and yes, this cold coming in is dangerous. There's no question about that. I don't think that's terroristic to say. I think there's like 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 other things that might be. Here's a couple texts that have come in. There is no warning. Trees just go bang. It's freaky. I remember deer hunting with trees exploding. Deer were jumpy, and so were we. But I'd say to that texter, so when it exploded, did you have to run for cover? Was it just the noise that jarred you? Were you actually in any danger? Exploding Trees was my band name in the early 90s. It's loud, says another, I guess, Exploding Tree survivor. Maybe there's an online, website or an organization, Exploding Tree Survivors. I don't know. Guess it's possible. Where else are we here? Nice try. People don't really believe that, do they, Dan? I don't know. Between exploding trees and corn to make the humidity higher, like corn sweat, what else is there going to be? The grass is going to be lava everywhere. You step heated grass. I don't even know what that means. That might have been one of those dictated texts. But he brings up corn sweat. That was another one. I think that's the last time we talked about terms that I don't think many of us were very familiar with. Corn sweat.
I think I'm willing to go out on a limb and say I would rather deal with the corn sweat. It's a bold take. But instead of exploding trees that may take out a power line, I'll take the corn sweat.
I think I would too. Are they related?
Think about it.
Could the corn sweat do something to the tree that makes it more likely that in the depths of winter it will explode? Does one thing have anything to do with the other? I don't know. There is no warning. Trees just go bang. It's freaky. Oh, I think that's the one I just read. Apparently there's a couple of those basically saying the same thing, that that noise, I guess, out of nowhere would freak everybody out. That wouldn't be surprising. I lived in northern Minnesota for 9 years. Temperatures go down to minus 38. I've never heard of or seen an exploding tree. This is Brewpastor. The bark could essentially flash freeze and shrink, and underneath doesn't shrink as fast, so the bark could crack. You might hear it, but they're not going to explode to smithereens and throw splinters all over. But obviously, if you're a weather terrorist, you use that word deliberately, right? Explosion, an exploding tree. That sounds dangerous, correct? A bomb cyclone sounds dangerous. A bomb, right? It's all part of the bit. I just wish the weather terrorists who are capable of that would just own up to it. Just be more honest about it. And maybe we could all, get along and get on with the rest of our lives as well. Let's get our first break in. We're not going to talk exploding trees with our next guest. We're going to talk about a lot more serious subjects that he's been covering today and yesterday as well. Kind of a roundup on a number of different local subjects with KARE 11 intrepid reporter Lou Raguse. Lou is coming up next right here on The Fan.
If you want to chime in on what's happening in your favorite KFAN shows, you can. You can make your voice heard on the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line. So let us know what you have to say by texting your message to 64686. It's 64686. Standard text message and data rates apply.
We're going to try to cover a lot of ground in a relatively short amount of time with our next guest, one of our favorites. It's KARE 11 reporter Lou Raguse, kind enough to join us via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline. Lou, maybe we start, and thank you again for the time. I know you've been extremely busy the last few days especially, and I think all day today. So just update us on where you've been today, what you've been looking at today that might be of interest to our listeners.
Thanks so much for having me on, Dan. Today I've been in the federal courthouse for most of the day where some of the people arrested by ICE have had hearings. And probably the most interesting one to me is the man who was shot in the leg by the ICE agent midweek last week, because that was the case that then led to the unrest in North Minneapolis after the shooting. It was determined today that the man will stand trial for assault on an officer. But within the details and all the testimony today, there just were so many contradictions from what Homeland Security initially told us about the whole case and even the ICE officer's narrative about the shooting.
Do we know, and the condition of the individual who was shot in the leg, he is fine, presumably? Yeah,
it was a minor wound.
Gotcha.
And so he was fine. He was taken back to the jail from the hospital, very quickly after it happened. But, initially what Homeland Security said was this was an ambush and an attempted murder on the agent. And it was a targeted operation that we were doing to arrest this person. And none of those things have turned out to be true. It does appear that there was a struggle between two different guys here and an ICE officer, but they weren't, it wasn't even the person that they thought that they were chasing after in the first place. And I think, who knows if we'll ever see the end of it, but the use of force investigation of whether it was a justified shot or not, there's a lot of question marks there.
You, I think, like to live and work in a I guess, the area of precision, right? That's what you look for. That's what you try to do when you're reporting stuff. And I think it's fair to say that when it comes to, how these stories are presented, I'm talking about by authorities, there has not been, and this is part of the problem, right? There has not been a whole lot of precision. There has been a whole lot of contradiction.
You're exactly right. And part of the frustration for me and people like me who, like the precision and like getting the answers is we may not get the answers on a lot of this stuff and things may move on. This one last thing on this case in particular, the judge, decided that there's enough evidence to take it forward to a trial to see if he's guilty or not on the assault of the officer. But the judge said that there's not enough evidence to keep these guys in jail in the meantime. So in a normal circumstance, the person would be released until their trial happens. But what is happening in this one is there's a detainer on these guys for ICE because they are in the country illegally, and ICE is probably just going to deport them before they ever see a trial.
Yesterday, and I think you watched all this, I don't know if you were there for it, there was a press conference that we did not get to yesterday. I wish I'd been aware of it a little bit earlier, that I found extremely troubling, where what we were basically presented with, I think the video you sent out, was the accusation that we had that off-duty police are finding themselves, according to authorities, in position where they are being cornered, they are being stopped, etc. Give our audience, if they've not paid attention to it, what that was all about yesterday and any ongoing reaction to it today.
This is one of the most remarkable press conferences that I've seen recently. It was held by a couple different police chiefs and the sheriff. So Mark Bruley is the police chief of Brooklyn Park, and he's been pretty visible over the years, over my entire career that I've worked here in Minneapolis, actually. And, it has a pretty good reputation as being, one of the straight shooters. And what the press conference was about is that they've been receiving calls, and we've reported on these cases, of U.S. citizens being stopped, racially profiled, and detained by ICE. And what they reported in the press conference is that they're not just getting these calls from the public, it's happening to their own officers while they're off duty. These non-white officers, the one case that I shared, I'll just share that example. A female officer was driving in her car. She drove past an ICE officer who then tried to pull her over. They boxed her in and pulled her over. they came up to her window and asked for her paperwork. And since she's a U.S. citizen, she doesn't have quote unquote paperwork. And she wanted to begin filming the interaction because of the rhetoric that was being used with her cell phone. The ICE officer knocked her cell phone away so that she couldn't do that. And eventually she had to pull the card of saying, you know, I'm a Brooklyn Park police officer, just to get them to stop what they were doing. And they said that immediately the ICE officers just stopped communicating with her, went back to their vehicles and drove away, weren't able to get the identification of any of them. And so there's no way for them to file a complaint, because you have to have the name of the officer that you're complaining about to file these complaints with DHS, with the Homeland Security.
So how can anybody with a straight face suggest this is part of a targeted operation? Again, very precise operation. It's laughable.
You know, and just so people understand what targeted means, that means, like, let's say that Lou Raguse is in this country illegally. They have a piece of paper or a computer screen that says, we're going to get Lou Raguse right now, and then they go and get him. But obviously, through the countless examples that we've shown in our reporting and what was reported right there, there are a number of random stops, not targeted, random. And what is that based on? It based on skin color, or based on some other insinuation that this person, to them, might not be in the country legally. And then they've proceeded with either making arrests or eventually letting these people go. And we've been reported on these cases over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and there are several, right? It's not like there's one in a million. I mean, we have several examples.
No, it's not.
Go ahead.
Back to Chief Bruley for a second.
Yes.
You know, he was careful to separate how in the past they have had good interactions and relationships with federal immigration officers, and that it is a noticeable difference during the last couple of weeks when this surge of ICE officials have come into town for this particular operation. So
again, remember who's giving this press conference. This is an individual in law enforcement. This is not an anti-law enforcement individual who obviously felt compelled to stand in front of people and lay this out, correct?
Correct. And he gave that example. The St. Paul police chief said they've heard the exact same thing from theirs. Sheriff DeWanna Witt said that she's heard the exact same thing from some of her deputies while they're off duty. So it is not a one-off. It is happening to multiple off-duty police officers, and then they made the obvious point, which is, if this is happening to our police officers, it's obviously happening to the broader public as well.
All right, I'm going to read you a text that just came in from a listener named Tim. Here's what he writes. So an off-duty police officer gets pulled over, and the first thing she does is reach for her phone. Where is her badge? Why? Hold on. These texts are coming in too fast here now. I'll get down to it. Oh, my goodness. Here we go. Why doesn't she hand them her ID? Yeah, okay, I'm sure this happened, and we're just supposed to believe stories. Haven't you hit on it? The whole point of the law enforcement is saying she should not have to identify herself as someone in law enforcement. That's the first pushback I would have for Tim. But what do you say to those who are saying, well, why are we just supposed to believe these stories?
Well, the thing is, this is America. And if you are an American citizen, you are not expected to carry proof that you are an American citizen with you and be expected to present that proof when asked. That is literally what the Gestapo did in Nazi Germany. So that is not an expectation in our country. And you can play the game of, well, why don't you just comply? Why don't you just comply? You could play that game all the way to the end. But at a certain point, this is America, where people have constitutional rights.
Well, you know, the same guy is, fired back as, why should we believe these stories? You don't have to believe anything, right? In fact, part of the reason she can't document it is her phone got knocked out of her hand as she was attempting to. But beyond that, you have to think then law enforcement is in on the conspiracy here, that they're willing to put their necks on the line in a press conference situation to say what was alleged yesterday. What's the upside in doing that? I guess I don't understand.
Exactly. And I think that it's worth noting that this was not there was some trepidation in holding this press conference in the first place. Yep. It's not a comfortable thing for law enforcement to call out other law enforcement. They have to work together at the end of the day, and they will have to work together again after this. It was something that these departments got together because they were hearing the same things and decided to bring this to light. And I mean, if you watch, it's particularly Axel Henry, the St. Paul police chief. I thought he sounded incredibly nervous getting up there and talking about this. There wasn't bravado that we are the anti-ICE coalition and this is just part of our daily thing. It stood out to me as something that was different.
Have you had a chance yet to talk with Joe Thompson?
I have not personally talked with Joe Thompson, no. Okay. But I know all about it. Right. I know I've talked with so many people that have worked in that office and have knowledge about what happened and what the impact of what happened will be.
And what do you believe, based on your reporting, happened?
Joe Thompson, in his capacity in the office and the others that he was working with, were involved with the initial investigation that began into the shooting of Renee Good by an ICE officer. And it's pretty standard that there would be a civil rights investigation that proceeds after something like this. And not to say that the officer will be charged, but just to get all of the facts, and then those decisions can be made. But shortly after, a day or two into it, in the BCA, they had this agreement with the FBI that the state official, the BCA, would be cooperating. The call from up on high came down that they would no longer allow the BCA into this investigation. They would no longer be investigating a civil rights investigation into the shooting itself, and they instead would start investigating the victim, Renee Good, and her wife for their connections and activities with protesters.
One of the I think huge parts of this story is the obvious, that Thompson, Sandy Lugar before, and several others who resigned were involved in some very effective cases, one could say, whether you're talking about going after gangs or going after the series of scandals that you have covered as well as you have. So on the ground, what impact, how devastating is the losses of these individuals, their brain power, their experience in terms of continuing that momentum, and one could say trying to continue to follow the story and get to the bottom of whatever else is out there?
Right. And so their resignations, of course, would come, you could describe as, because of their conscience or an act of principle, because of, being told to something that they felt was against their oath as a federal prosecutor. People have to understand how much work this small group of people had done in the 78 Feeding Our Future cases that have been charged and the 18 other Minnesota Medicaid program cases that have been charged. This small group has been handling all of that. And it's like a snowball. They investigate one person, they get all this information on them, then they find out that their buddy over here also had a fake company, and their buddy over here had a fake company, and then they eventually can charge those people. And they can get past this case, and then they can charge 3 more cases. That's kind of how this thing works. And so without them in the mix anymore, that institutional knowledge that is gone will make it extremely difficult. It'll make it impossible to charge fraud at the rate that it had been charged. And it makes it very difficult to continue these same fraud cases moving forward. And it's worth noting that the stated purpose of this ICE operation that's going on in Minnesota right now is because of fraud. That's according to the federal government.
Can you update us lastly, Lou? We've tried to cover a lot of ground in just a short amount of time, and I know we're scratching the surface only on several of them. Where are we in the investigation that has allegedly been launched in the governor, the mayor, and the attorney general, mayor of Minneapolis and the attorney general?
Well, this week subpoenas were issued, and what that means is subpoenas were given to the offices of each of those elected officials that basically say, if you are the custodian of the records of this office, you are going to be called to testify to a grand jury, and you're going to have to turn over all these records and these communications so that they can be investigated. So it is an early stage of a quote-unquote investigation. Those Mayor Fry and Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison are not being called to testify themselves because they are the subject you don't get called to testify at your own grand jury if they're trying to charge you with a crime. It remains to be seen if they will charge anything because they're not, close to that yet. But this is the stage where they start gathering the evidence and they legally force the offices to provide the documents and the communication.
I really appreciate the time. We'll be in touch. And thanks again
Thank you so much
for giving us as much time today. I know you're busy. Thanks, Lou.
Anytime.
Appreciate you. Lou Raguse, KARE 11 reporter. We'll get him back again soon because there's obviously there are tentacles to all these stories. And he's as good as anybody in reporting on them and reacting to them. And it is instructive via the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line that a reporter who, as long as he was covering and following the Feeding Our Future scandals and stories, was lauded as a guy who just patiently and fearlessly followed the stories, pointed out contradictions that even might have come from the governor's administration. Then he was our guy. Now he's following a different kind of story that you might have your feelings hurt about if you're on one side of the political fence or the other. And now it's, who is this guy? What's he trying to do? Why is he editorializing? It's a fascinating illumination of why we're in the pickle we are, a world of sharks and jets. Back with Kevin Seifert, Toy Department. He's in studio next.
Bonus Box is back on KFAN. We have 9 chances for you to win $1,000 every weekday. It's every hour from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. The keyword this hour was dollar, by the way. Keyword dollar, KFAN.com. Keyword dollar.
Playoffs continue this weekend. NFC and AFC title games. They do not include the Minnesota Vikings. They do not include Brett Blakemore's Green Bay Packers. They no longer include my Monsters of the Midway, the Chicago Bears, after a very eventful and ultimately for Chicago, crushing loss in overtime. Kevin Seifert is in studio to talk about all of that and some Vikings intel as well. How much have you thought about or heard people talk about disappointment in Ben Johnson not staying true to what he's supposed to be, which is we get a late touchdown with 15 seconds to go, bleep it. We're going to win or lose the game right now by going for 2.
Well, they had, I'm trying to remember the exact sequence. They had many close in opportunities.
Well, they had it against Blakemore's club, right? Yeah. Among them.
And I didn't feel like they were, and he said this afterwards, and I had to agree with it. They, in the short yardage situations they were in and the goal line situations they had been in, they had not really done that well. And so I think that for whatever reason, their matchups in those goal line plays were not very good, and they had probably used most of their good 2-point plays anyway to try to score touchdowns on those plays. So there was definitely a sense of like that would be a great place to just, close it out right there.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking watching the game, like I'm not objecting to this because it feels as though they have not really they have not won many of the matchups on these short yardage situations.
Well, and frankly, the overtime played out perfectly for them, right? You win the toss, give the Rams the ball, stop them. You're driving down the field. Now, let me ask you one other thing about the interception that, led to the Rams then driving for the field goal. There's 2 ways to look at that play. Receiver screwed up. Quarterback is too greedy. On the other hand, you could say, well, that's Caleb. He's the only reason you're here is he's going to do some stuff that might be dangerous, but ultimately he has the athleticism to do it. It came off to me like that's a play you might be willing to try if you're literally losing and we got to try something. To me, when it's a tie game and all you need is 3, it did feel a little bit on the reckless side.
Yeah, there's a fine line between attacking and reckless, and it was reckless only to me in the sense that he couldn't have. There wasn't the connection between him and Moore that there needed to be, and maybe he didn't realize that. Maybe he thought the receiver was going to do exactly what he thought he should be doing.
Yeah.
But most of the X's and O's, all 22 guys who look at that play, say if the receiver had gone where it appeared
He was supposed to?
where it appeared, and based on where the throw went,
Yeah.
that's a big play, and you're in field goal range, and
Right there.
maybe you've won the game right there. And you're talking about, I think they were, the Rams defense had probably played almost like 80 plays at that point, and it had been a long game, and it's okay to think you might have a good opportunity to attack and get down there and not necessarily have to, because the offense has obviously played almost 80 plays as well. And so, if you can get a chunk of yardage, and everybody's on the same page, then yes, you should. And the mistake, to the extent there was a mistake, is that they weren't on as much of the same page as they probably thought they were.
Kevin Seifert in studio. If you have Vikings and or NFL questions or observations, hit the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line. That number is 64686. Your latest intel on the future of Brian Flores.
He's had interviews in person with both the Ravens and the Steelers, and has had one defensive coordinator interview that we know of with Washington.
So he did interview with them.
Oh yeah, he was in the building, is my understanding.
Plot thickens.
Yeah, and so that was, I want to say that was either the very beginning of this week or the end of last week. So it's been a few days. So to the extent that everybody thought it was a slam dunk that he was returning if he doesn't get a head coach, then I think that his willingness to at least see what is out there, has been confirmed that that's what he wants to do, is to at least see what's out there. And so but the big thing is he a serious candidate in either Baltimore or Pittsburgh? And my understanding is that at least in Pittsburgh, because he spent a year there, they know him. If they hated him for that year, then he wouldn't even have been in the building. They know better than to use him as one of their Rooney Rule token interviews, to the extent that those happen. So I think that from what I understand, there's feeling around the league that he's a legitimate candidate for that job. They have that's maybe the best job in the NFL if you're a coach, because of the patience that the Rooney family has traditionally had and the levels that organization has functioned at for a very long time. 3 coaches since 1969. And so like that's an awesome job, and a lot of people are very interested in it, but they know him at least from that 1 year, and they have some serious interest there.
Texter asks me, Dan, how mad would you be if Flores went to Green Bay? I wouldn't be mad at all.
Blakemore would be doing flips,
and that'd be a hell of a story. That would be juicy stuff for him to leave here to go to another team in the division.
Because usually it's the other way around.
Then obviously to be the defensive coordinator, right? There he would have to be.
Yeah, in Green Bay.
Because
Matt LaFleur's back.
LaFleur's back, right?
Yep. And so usually the train runs the other direction, from Green Bay to Minnesota. And it's usually guys that are sort of at the end of their career, and Brian Flores very much at the peak of his. And so that would be a much wilder turn of events than even I can reasonably imagine when it became clear that his contract was going to expire. But on the other hand, I think it was widely expected that Jeff Hafley, their former defensive coordinator, was going to be a candidate for many jobs, and with as many jobs open out there, that he was going to get one of them, and sure enough, he did. So that opening has been anticipated for a while.
What is the Hafley attraction? Is he just? Why is he considered?
Well, their Green Bay defense has been very good.
Yeah.
The Dolphins also hired one of the Green Bay's front office people to be their general manager, so it's somebody that he's familiar with. So I'm not sure if it was a package deal, but it looks like it was close to a package deal. And so there's some familiarity between the new GM in Miami and Jeff Hafley. The defense under him for 2 years performed well. He was a longtime assistant coach in the NFL, then went to the college side and eventually became a head coach for a couple years, and actually stepped down from a head coaching job amidst the NIL revolution and came to the NFL, and it sure paid off for him. So,
how quickly is the dust going to settle? Is it do you expect we're going to know within a couple of weeks at the latest
on Flores?
On Flores, yeah.
I hope, but I can't say that for sure. There was 10 openings. There's now 6, and some of the Buffalo just opened the other day, and there's definitely some coaches who I think are coaching on the teams that are still playing that either haven't been able to interview or haven't been able to do the second round of interviews. So there's a lot of things that are fluid, and because there's so many changes, that 10 is the most there's ever been. It's happened a few other times, but 10 is the most. There's so many like secondary dominoes. There's some teams who have retained their head coaches but are looking to change their coordinators. And then there's all the coaches that are being hired that are looking to assemble coordinators. So there's a lot of coordinator and assistant coach movement happening at a higher degree than there had been. And so, if Brian Flores wants to, just have an auction for his services, there will be more openings for that, as a defense coordinator than in some previous years.
So are we close to saying we will be surprised if either way, head coach or coordinator Brian Flores comes back to the Vikings in 2026?
I can't say I'd be surprised if he comes back, but what I keep saying is that it is not there. It is a realistic possibility that he leaves.
In a way, it hasn't been up until now.
Yeah, well, in a way that because he was under contract as defense coordinator.
That's true, but the coordinator part is, I think, what makes this intriguing.
Yes, and that's why I think and I agree, and that's why I'm saying, there's a non-zero chance that he does leave to go be someone else's defense coordinator. But is there more than a 50% chance? In which case, if he comes back, then I would be surprised. I'm not ready to go there yet. But it's interesting enough that it's even gotten to this point.
Yeah. Buffalo, obviously that's got to be on paper the best job. On the other hand, you better win a Super Bowl, I guess, or at least get to the Super Bowl,
after today's press conference, what
did I miss?
Well, so they did it. They lost Saturday, I think. Then they fired the coach Sunday. Today's Wednesday, and they just did the press conference today. So they've had a few days, the owner and the general manager, to kind of get on the same page. And it was kind of a train wreck of a press conference where the reporters were asking the general manager, Brandon Beane, about a specific draft pick receiver that they had made, Keon Coleman, that has not worked out very well. And the owner jumped in and said, I'm going to jump in here. And that was the coaches who wanted him, not the GM. So there was, and it immediately just went from there. And, if you were someone who said, well, man, the Bills have their act together. They have Josh Allen, they have, Dalvin Cook's little brother. They have, some other nice players. Mm-hmm. They've been winning forever. I can go in there and, it's cruise control to the Super Bowl. And you watch that press conference and you actually see the owner in action, and you see the interaction between the general manager and the owner. The general manager is now the president of all football operations, and that's who I'm going to be reporting to. You say, well, maybe there's a lot more going on there than you think. And so it depends who you talk to. I mean, there's not many jobs that you would go into with a Josh Allen, and that's a huge drawing card. And whoever gets that job, well, that's probably the first thing they'll say when they get hired and have a press conference. But I would think that anybody who has experience in, sort of the political backstabbing and things that occur in a lot of sports franchises would watch that playing out in the open. And
what am I getting myself
say, well,
into?
maybe there's a reason why this job is open, and it's. It's attractive, but it's not the slam dunk that some people might think.
Explain to me why the guy who seemed to be, in the catbird seat and could pick any job, pretty much any job he wanted, John Harbaugh, picks the Giants. I guess I don't get it. There's no certainty on that QB. Now, maybe he thinks there is, but why is that the job for him?
It may be, before the Buffalo job opened, maybe it wouldn't have been. And you say the same for Kevin Stefanski, who went to Atlanta. I think Harbaugh, they really, if you're a student of history in the NFL, you look at the Giants as one of the premier franchises in pro sports. If you're only somebody who's watched them in the past 10 or 15 years, which is a fair assessment, then you say, well, that's, they've been operating at a low level for a long time. But they put a full court press on him. The owner of the Giants, John Mara, is in cancer treatment, so his brother sort of headed this up, and his brother drove down to Baltimore and would not take no for an answer. And they spent a
Tenacious,
lot, and they made sure that John Harbaugh knew he was very wanted by one of the premier organizations, and they said, what do we need to do to make this happen? And he laid out all the things and
they said yes.
And they said yes. And so he didn't. I don't know that he did a formal interview with anybody else. I think he did a virtual phone call type situation with Atlanta, but they put a full court press on him. I think he's somebody who has an appreciation for the longer term history of the Giants. If you go in there and you turn it around and you make them into what they were in the 60s or the 80s and early 90s, then and into the 2000s, then you've cemented yourself in the history of the game, and I'm sure that's at least a little bit a part of what's going on.
So let's talk about the teams that are left and try to sort of connect their stories to the current conditions of the Vikings, current condition of the Vikings. And I bring it up because you can look at Seattle and you could say Darnold has been successful this year, but his numbers aren't that different. I mean, in terms of ratings, they're not that high. They're okay. He's made some big throws. I don't think he threw as many I think he had 10 more touchdown passes last year than this year. But I don't know that anybody, even if he said, well, the Vikings blew it not keeping him, would say he's looking like a quote-unquote franchise quarterback, right? Denver, now, they don't have the guy they want at the quarterback position, but he made a lot of important plays in that game to help him eventually, but his overall performance still, I don't think, reaches the level where you go, well, if you want to get to the Final Four, you got to have a big-time quarterback. So what does that tell us about it? Does that mean quarterback is actually a little less important than we think, or is that overreacting to the teams who happen to have gotten there to the Final Four this year?
Well, the two teams you named might have the two best defenses in the NFL, and so that's certainly part of it. I think the quarterback play there for each of those teams is a separate discussion. I think there's some games this year that Darnold won on his own. Like I think of this Washington game where he came out and he had thrown like 4 or 5 touchdown passes before anybody had taken a breath. So there was a few games earlier in the season that he just flat out was the guy that you could imagine that when he was drafted number 3 overall might otherwise be. But I know we can dissect each game and whether he's committed too many turnovers. I think he led the league in turnovers. But when you're the quarterback of a team that won 13 regular season games and gets to the NFC Championship game, it's hard to really come down too hard on the play. And so, excuse me. And
I know that feeling.
It makes me emotional just thinking about it. And so in the case of Bo Nix, I have not been totally impressed with him in his first 2 years as a starter, but I watched you watch the divisional playoff game and they hardly ran the ball at all. I mean, it was either him running or him throwing. And so,
and he led him on the big drive.
Yeah.
That they had to have to win the game.
Yeah. And even if he was just throwing PI balls, he smartly did that.
Right.
And so you don't have to have a Hall of Fame quarterback to win the Super Bowl, but you have to have high level play at the most important points of the season, and that's what both those teams have done.
And Seattle was 14-3. He's had back-to-back 14-3 seasons.
Were they 14? Yeah, 13. Yeah,
14-3.
Yeah. And so, and then and this year they managed to advance through, and he pushed through a real
Number
injury.
1 seed.
Yeah,
you're right.
He pushed through a real injury. And so I can't say anything. I wondered if he was going to fall on his face in the playoffs, just like everybody else did. And it certainly helps when you start a game with a kickoff return for a touchdown and you're immediately playing from ahead.
But he's still, and they didn't win it because of him, but he made a couple of important throws, including a nice touchdown to the corner of the end zone.
Yeah, you don't, like I said, you don't have to, and we'll see who ends up winning the Super Bowl, I guess. But you don't have to have a guy who's been first team All-Pro for 5 straight years and is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. It certainly helps if you look at the AFC, who is, when it was that stretch where it was either Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, or Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl from the AFC, it certainly it helps a lot, but especially in a season that is as wide open as this one has been, you just need to have the guy making the plays. And so to connect it to the Vikings, that was sort of what they hoped. Not that they thought J.J. McCarthy could take them to the Super Bowl this year, but they thought if they had their act together on defense and they had their act together in the kicking game and they had their act together in the running game, that a quarterback who could be counted on to make certain big plays and certain big situations would be enough to get them certainly to the playoffs, and then we'll see what happens from there.
All right, we will talk when we come back about the controversy surrounding the duel, the two pass interference calls in that game, and then also the catch or not a catch, because I know you have strong feelings about that as well. So we're going to get into all of that. We'll get into a lot more Vikings vetting as well. Kevin Seifert in studio for the hour. Luigi is scheduled to join us at 4:30 this afternoon, and then Pat Kessler, I think, coming off of the IR. He had a flu or a cold or something last week. He is expected back in studio. That will be sometime around 5:30 this evening. Questions for Seifert, as I said, Bradshaw and Brian KFAN text line is 64686. Back in just a minute.